There exists a particular quality in certain individuals that others sense but cannot name. A depth, a knowing, an ability to see through facades that makes the superficial uncomfortable. You carry this quality whether you recognize it yet or not. And if you have survived prolonged exposure to narcissistic manipulation, something within your psyche has been fundamentally altered, not destroyed, but reorganized at a level most will never access. This is not a video about healing in the conventional sense. This is about recognizing what you have become through the fire. Because what emerges from narcissistic abuse is not merely a damaged version of who you were. It is something the unconscious produces only under extreme conditions, a set of psychological capacities that cannot be taught, only forged. You feel it, do you not? The way you now perceive interactions that once seemed normal. The way certain performances that convince others leave you cold with recognition. This is not paranoia. This is not bitterness. This is the development of faculties that require a specific kind of suffering to awaken. According to my research into trauma and the psyche's compensatory mechanisms, what conventional psychology dismisses as hypervigilance is often the emergence of genuine perceptual refinement. The psyche, when subjected to sustained reality distortion, develops new instruments of detection, not as pathology, but as adaptation to an environment where survival required seeing what others could not see. Through years of studying individuals who emerged from these patterns, what became clear was this: the unconscious does not waste suffering. Every descent into psychological hell that does not destroy the individual entirely produces something, and what it produces in those who survive narcissistic abuse is a constellation of traits so specific, so recognizable to those who carry them that they function almost as markers of initiation. You have been through something that reorganized your relationship to reality itself. For months, perhaps years, you inhabited a world where your perceptions were systematically invalidated, where your emotional responses were weaponized against you, where truth itself became unstable. The conscious mind experiences this as torment. But the unconscious, the self, in its terrible wisdom, uses this crucible to burn away certain illusions that most carry to their graves. What I am about to describe are not symptoms. They are not signs of damage to be fixed. They are the specific psychological structures that emerge when someone passes through sustained manipulation and comes out the other side intact. 12 traits that mark depth psychology's version of initiation. Transformation through ordeal. But here is what disturbs the comfortable narratives about abuse and recovery. These traits often make you less palatable to a world that prefers easy trust and unexamined belief. They make you see too much, feel too accurately, refuse too clearly, and this is precisely their value. The first trait manifests as an almost preternatural ability to detect incongruence between words and energy, as if the psyche developed new sensory organs through necessity. Where others hear only the content of speech, you perceive the gap between stated intention and underlying motive. This is not mind reading. This is pattern recognition refined to a degree that feels almost uncomfortable in its accuracy. The unconscious, when forced to navigate environments where words routinely meant their opposite, develops compensatory mechanisms. What depth psychology reveals is that the psyche learns languages the conscious mind does not speak. Body language, micro-expressions, tonal shifts so subtle most miss them entirely. You learn to read these languages because your survival required it. Others may call this suspicious. They are wrong. What you possess is discernment, the capacity to sense authenticity and its absence with remarkable precision. The analyst who spots financial irregularities is called paranoid until the fraud is uncovered. Your ability to detect emotional fraud functions by the same principle. When someone's words carry the texture of performance rather than truth, you feel it before you can articulate why. This is not a flaw in your perception. This is your perception finally functioning at the level where truth actually lives, beneath words, in the realm of energy and intention that most never learn to read. Second emerges a relationship with solitude that has been transformed from punishment into sanctuary. Where once aloneness felt like abandonment, it has become the space where your psyche can finally rest from the exhausting work of navigating others' distortions. This shift, from fearing solitude to requiring it, marks a fundamental change in how the self relates to external validation. What the psyche learns through narcissistic abuse is company is not inherently valuable. The presence of others, if that presence demands constant performance or reality bending, is more depleting than any loneliness. And so the unconscious begins to assign new value to solitude, not as isolation, but as return to psychological truth. You may have noticed this shift, the way an evening alone no longer carries the sting it once did, the way you can now distinguish between loneliness and aloneness. One, a symptom of disconnection from self, the other a choice to prioritize inner truth over external approval. This is not withdrawal. This is the psyche reclaiming its right to exist without constant negotiation. Through my analytical work, this pattern emerged repeatedly. Those who survived narcissistic patterns developed what might be called sovereignty in solitude, the capacity to be whole without audience, real without witness, at peace without validation. Most people fear this. You have learned to value it, and this is freedom most never taste. Third appears a refined awareness of power dynamics that operates beneath social performance. You sense who holds power in any room, not by title or volume, but by watching where attention flows and whose reality others unconsciously defer to. This awareness cannot be taught. It emerges only through extended exposure to covert domination. The psyche, as I came to understand through decades of observation, develops what might be called structural sight when forced to navigate invisible hierarchies. Narcissistic systems operate through unspoken rules where power is exercised through implication rather than statement. To survive such systems, you learn to see the architecture of power itself. This means you now perceive dynamics most mistake for personality conflicts as what they actually are: contests for psychological dominance. You watch someone subtly redirect conversation back to themselves and recognize the pattern. You feel the room's energy shift when a particular person speaks and understand you are witnessing deference to unacknowledged authority. This trait often isolates you from those who prefer not to see these structures. They experience your awareness as cynicism. But what you possess is not cynicism. It is clarity about how power operates when hidden. And this clarity, while sometimes lonely, prevents a particular kind of blindness that costs others dearly. What surfaces forth is a capacity to hold paradox without collapsing into binary thinking. You can recognize that someone caused harm without needing them to be a monster. You can acknowledge your own mistakes without drowning in shame. You can hold both the truth of what happened and compassion for all involved, including yourself, without those truths canceling each other out. Depth psychology reveals that most minds cannot tolerate ambiguity. They need clear villains and victims, good and evil, right and wrong. But narcissistic abuse, precisely because it operates in gray zones where care and cruelty intertwine, destroys this simple binary. What remains is the capacity to hold multiple truths simultaneously without resolution. You learned this because you had to. The person who hurt you was not evil incarnate, but a human being enacting their own unresolved shadow. This does not excuse what they did, but neither does their harm require you to flatten them into caricature. You can hold both the truth of damage and the truth of complexity. This capacity makes you dangerous to ideologies that require simplification. Political movements, religious certainties, social tribes, all demand you choose a side and deny nuance. But your psyche, refined through ambiguity, resists this flattening. You see the truth in contradictions most cannot tolerate. And this This is wisdom that emerges only through suffering, that refuses easy answers. The fifth characteristic reveals itself as deep resistance to performative authenticity. You can smell the cultivation of rawness, the strategic deployment of vulnerability, the carefully curated spontaneity that passes for genuine in a world increasingly comfortable with performance. This is not cynicism about human connection. This is allergy to its simulation. What my clinical work demonstrated is this. Those who survive narcissistic abuse develop what might be called authenticity radar. Because you experience sustained exposure to performed emotion, tears without sadness, rage without genuine anger, declarations of love that meant control, your psyche learned to distinguish real feeling from its theatrical reproduction. This means influencer culture, with its monetized vulnerability and branded authenticity, likely disturbs you in ways you may struggle to articulate. You watch someone perform their breakdown for likes and feel not compassion but revulsion at the exploitation of sacred territory. This is not hardness of heart. This is protection of real feeling from those who would weaponize its appearance. You have no patience for those who treat their inner life as content, their struggles as brand differentiation, their transformation as product to sell, because you know, in your bones, in your scarred psyche, what real breakdown feels like. And it does not come with ring lights and perfect framing. Beyond this emerges a heightened sensitivity to manipulation masked as care. When someone's generosity carries hooks you cannot yet see, you feel it. When concern functions as surveillance, when help arrives with invisible price tags, when love is offered as transaction, you recognize these patterns before they fully form. This is not ingratitude. This is pattern recognition that can save your life. The psyche operates in ways that protect against repeated injury. Through my analytical work, what emerged was this. Those who survived covert manipulation develop early warning systems that most lack. Because you learned that care can be camouflage for control, your unconscious now scans for the signature of conditional giving. Perhaps someone offers help you did not request and becomes cold when you decline. Perhaps a friend insists on doing you favors that somehow always require future reciprocation. Perhaps someone positions themselves as your rescue, and grows hostile when you begin to stand without them. You feel these dynamics early now, before the trap fully closes. Others may tell you that you are too guarded, that you see threats where none exist. But here is where it becomes disturbing. More often than not, time proves you right. That person who seemed so caring does reveal themselves as controlling. That generous gesture does carry expectations. Your suspicion, which feels to you like damage, is actually functioning as accurate perception most people lack until it costs them greatly. The seventh trait manifests as an almost uncomfortable tolerance for uncertainty. Where others grasp at premature closure, at explanations that soothe even when false, you can sit in the unknown without forcing resolution. This capacity, to endure not knowing without collapsing into fantasy, is rare, and it emerged from necessity. What depth psychology teaches is that the psyche, when forced to live in sustained uncertainty about reality itself, either fragments or develops radical tolerance for ambiguity. During narcissistic abuse, truth became unstable. Your perceptions were denied, your memories questioned, your reality systematically undermined. You could either break or learn to exist without the solid ground of certainty most require. You learn to wait, to gather more data before concluding, to live in questions longer than most can bear. Others may interpret this as indecisiveness, but what you possess is something far more valuable, the capacity to resist premature closure when the full picture has not yet revealed itself. This means you are slower to trust, slower to commit, slower to declare certainty about situations others have already simplified into easy narratives. And this slowness, which feels to you like hesitation, is actually wisdom refusing to repeat the mistake of believing before seeing. What develops eighth is a peculiar immunity to love bombing and idealization. When someone comes on too strong, declares too much too soon, seems too perfect in their attention and admiration, you feel not flattered, but alarmed. This reaction, which confuses those who have never been hunted, is your psyche protecting you from a pattern it knows intimately. I recall a woman who came to me after finally leaving a marriage saturated in manipulation. She spoke of meeting someone new who seemed everything her former partner was not. Attentive, generous with praise, quick to declare devotion, and yet she felt, she could not explain why, a quality of wrongness beneath the surface. What emerged through our work was this. Her unconscious recognized the pattern her conscious mind wanted to deny, intensity that bypasses ordinary development, adoration that requires no real knowing, promises that ignore the reality of who you actually are. These are not signs of exceptional love. They are signs of projection. Someone falling in love not with you, but with their fantasy of what you might provide. She learned to trust that alarm, to see sudden intensity not as flattery, but as warning. And months later, when his new person's mask slipped to reveal familiar patterns of control and manipulation beneath the initial worship, she was prepared. She left before the trap closed, because her psyche had learned what her mind once denied. Real love develops slowly, knows you before claiming you, offers steadiness rather than intensity. You may recognize this pattern, the way you now feel cautious rather than excited when someone seems too enchanted too fast. This is not inability to receive love. This is refusal to confuse manipulation's opening move with genuine feeling. The ninth sign appears as radical responsibility without self-blame. You can acknowledge every mistake you made, every way you contributed to dynamics, every moment your judgment failed, without drowning in the belief that you caused what was done to you. This distinction between responsibility and culpability is subtle. Most collapse them into one. From the perspective of individuation, growth requires accepting your part in every pattern you inhabit. But narcissistic abuse teaches a terrible distortion, that your imperfections justified another's cruelty, that your mistakes caused their manipulation, that had you only been better, the abuse would not have occurred. This is the voice of internalized oppression, and your psyche knows it as lie. What you have learned is this: you can own every failure while refusing to accept that your humanity caused another's inhumanity. You were imperfect, so was the situation, so were the choices available. But imperfection does not equal culpability for how others chose to treat the sacred trust you offered. This capacity to hold accountability without self-destruction is rare. Most swing between denial and drowning. But you walk a knife's edge between them, accepting your part while refusing to carry weight that belongs to another. And this is integration most never achieve. Another marker surfaces as decreased need for external validation, not because you no longer value others' perspectives, but because you have learned the hard way that approval from the wrong sources is worthless. You would rather be disliked for truth than praised for performance. This shift from seeking approval to seeking accuracy marks fundamental maturation of the psyche. The self, in its wisdom, uses narcissistic abuse to sever attachment to validation from those who cannot see you truly. Because you learned that you could contort yourself into any shape required and still not receive genuine recognition of who you actually are rather than what you could provide, the unconscious eventually withdrew investment from that game entirely. This does not mean you feel nothing when criticized or praised. It means you have learned to weigh the source. Praise from someone who does not truly see you feels hollow rather than nourishing. Criticism from someone invested in your smallness feels irrelevant rather than devastating. You have learned to filter feedback through the question, does this person perceive me accurately? Others may mistake this for arrogance. They are wrong. What you possess is discernment about whose perspective matters, and this discernment frees you from the exhausting work of performing for audiences who will never truly see you regardless of how perfectly you perform. The 11th trait reveals itself through boundaries that emerge from clarity rather than anger. You can say no without rage, refuse without justification, withdraw without drama. This capacity, to protect yourself through calm assertion rather than defensive reaction, represents profound psychological development most never achieve. What became clear through decades of observation is this: most boundaries are reactive. They emerge from hurt, announced through anger, defended with intensity because the person setting them doubts their own right to have them. But you learned something different. You learned that boundaries need not be justified to be enforced, that no is a complete sentence, that your limits are valid simply because they are yours. This emerged from necessity. During narcissistic abuse, every boundary you attempted was challenged, negotiated, violated. You learned that explaining your boundaries gave weapons to those who wanted to dismantle them. And so the psyche learned eventually. State the boundary, hold the boundary, refuse to defend the boundary. Simply be the boundary. This looks like coldness to those accustomed to emotional manipulation working, but what you have developed is not coldness, it is clarity, the ability to honor your own limits without requiring others to understand or approve them. And this is sovereignty most spend their lives seeking and never find. Finally appears a paradoxical combination of hope and wariness that refuses to choose between them. You can walk into new relationships, new situations, new possibilities with genuine openness, while simultaneously maintaining awareness that betrayal remains possible. This integration of opposites, trust and caution, hope and wisdom, is what depth psychology calls mature relating. The archetypal forces at work here are subtle. Narcissistic abuse destroys naive hope, the childlike belief that good intentions ensure good outcomes, that sincerity protects from harm, that love conquers all. This destruction feels like death, and in a sense it is. It is the death of innocence that can never be reclaimed. But what the psyche produces from this death is not cynicism. It is something far more valuable, experienced hope. Hope that knows betrayal is possible and chooses openness anyway. Hope that maintains vigilance while refusing to let vigilance foreclose possibility. Hope that has been through fire and emerged tempered rather than destroyed. You carry this now, the capacity to risk connection while honoring what you know about human capacity for harm. To love again while remaining conscious that love does not guarantee safety. To hope for good outcomes while preparing for difficult ones. This is not hedging your bets. This is wisdom refusing to collapse into either naive trust or defensive closure. Most people never integrate these opposites. They swing between extremes. Total trust that burns them, total suspicion that isolates them. But you walk between these poles, holding both truths simultaneously, and this is the mark of genuine psychological maturation. Consider the ancient alchemical texts that spoke of transformation through ordeal. The base metal must be placed in the crucible and subjected to intense heat. The process is violent. The metal liquefies, its original form destroyed entirely. But what emerges, if the metal survives the process, is gold, refined, purified, fundamentally altered at the molecular level into something of greater value than what entered the fire. You have been through such a crucible. The narcissistic abuse you survived was not random suffering. It was, though you could not see it while enduring it, a terrible form of initiation, an ordeal that destroyed certain structures within your psyche while forging others. What you lost was the capacity for naive trust, for comfortable illusion, for surface-level connection. What you gained is everything I have described here. These 12 traits are not compensation for damage. They are the direct result of transformation through ordeal. They mark you as someone who has passed through a particular kind of psychological fire and emerged on the other side intact. Not unmarked, not undamaged, but intact, and carrying capacities most will never develop precisely because they will never be forced through such refinement. You may sometimes wish you could return to who you were before, to that more trusting, more open, more innocent version of yourself that could take people at face value and believe without evidence. But that person could not see what you now see, could not protect themselves as you now can, could not discern as you now discern. That person was more comfortable in the world, but also far more vulnerable to the specific predations you survived. What you carry now is not merely survival, it is transformation. The wounded healer archetype that Jung described operates through precisely this pattern. Only those who have descended into their own psychological hell can guide others through similar darkness. Only those who have been broken and integrated the break become truly whole. Only those who have survived manipulation develop the clarity to see it operating in systems most accept as normal. This does not mean you must become a healer, a teacher, a guide. The transformation is complete in itself, whether you share it or not. But what it does mean is this: you now possess something rare and valuable, a set of psychological capacities that mark depth, wisdom, and hard-won clarity. You see what others miss, you feel what others overlook, you refuse what others accept. And yes, this can be lonely. There is a particular isolation that comes with seeing clearly in a world that prefers comfortable illusion. Your capacity for discernment, your resistance to performance, your requirement for authenticity, your slow trust, these traits that serve you so well can also separate you from those who find your awareness uncomfortable, your boundaries excessive, your questions too probing. But here is what matters: you are no longer susceptible to the partics. Euler, kind of destruction you survived. These traits, all 12 of them, function as immune system against repeated narcissistic abuse. Not perfect immunity, nothing is perfect, but significant protection that most lack until they learn it through suffering as you did. You sense facades now before they fully form. You feel manipulation before it tightens. You recognize love bombing before you mistake it for love. You maintain sovereignty in solitude, clarity about power, tolerance for uncertainty. You hold paradox, accept responsibility without blame, set boundaries without anger. And you walk forward with hope that has been through fire and refused to die. This is not the person you were. That person is gone, transformed in the crucible of narcissistic abuse into someone fundamentally different. And while you may grieve who you were, while you may rage at the suffering that forced this change, recognize what you have become. Recognize the gold that emerged from fire. Recognize that these traits, earned through terrible necessity, mark you as someone who passed through initiation and survived. You carry depth now, wisdom, clarity, capacities that emerge only through ordeal. Most will never understand the cost of what you gained, but you know. You paid in years of confusion, in psychological torment, in the death of innocence and the birth of awareness. And what remains, these 12 traits you now embody, is not damage. It is transformation. It is initiation. It is the mark of someone who descended into psychological hell and returned carrying light for others still trapped in darkness. Not because you must save them, but because you survived. And survival itself, when integrated rather than denied, becomes wisdom. You are not broken. You are refined. These traits you now carry are not symptoms to heal, but capacities to honor. They make you see too much for comfort, feel too accurately for ease, refuse too clearly for popularity. But they also make you free. Free from illusions that imprison others, free from manipulations that ensnare the unsuspecting, free from performances that pass for connection. The journey forward is yours, but you walk it now with eyes that see clearly, boundaries that hold firmly, discernment that protects accurately. You walk it with the 12 traits of someone who survived narcissistic abuse and emerged not destroyed, but transformed. And this is victory of a kind most never recognize because they have never fought this particular battle. You have fought it, and you won, not by escaping unmarked, but by integrating the marks into wisdom. Not by forgetting what happened, but by refusing to let what happened define all that you are. Not by becoming hard, but by becoming clear. The psyche does not waste suffering. Your suffering produced these 12 traits, and these traits, earned through terrible necessity, forged in crucibles you never chose, are gold, refined, rare, valuable beyond measure to those who understand their cost. You carry them now, and they will serve you for all that remains of your journey.